Hello and welcome everyone. I am Ravi and today I welcome you to yet another tech enthusiastic video from Edureka. Java Servlet page is one of the major extensions to the Servlet technology. This server-side programming language is the main reason behind the creation of dynamic web pages. In this tutorial, we shall discuss the most frequently asked JSP interview questions so that you can crack the most toughest interviews. We shall divide the interview questions in three orders. Basic beginners level interview questions, followed by that we shall discuss the intermediate level of interview questions, and finally we shall wrap up the session with some advanced level interview questions. So without wasting much time, let us quickly begin with our first one, which is the beginner level interview questions. So the first question is difference between include directive and include action. So the answer for this question can be given as include directive includes content at page translation time, whereas include action includes the content at page request time. And the next difference is include directive prefers static web pages. The include action prefers the dynamic web pages. The next difference is include directive includes original content of the page, where the include action does not include the original content of the page. Followed by that, the next difference is the include directive cannot invoke the include method, whereas on the other hand, the include action is capable to invoke the include method. And the last difference between the both is page size can be increased at runtime in include directive, whereas in include action, the page size is always fixed. With this, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, what is a JSP? The answer for this question can be given as JSP is an abbreviation for Java Servlet Page. It is a server-side programming language which is used to create dynamic web pages in the form of HTML. Now, the third question. How can you include the results of another page? The answer is simple. The results of another page can be included using two methods. The two methods are include directive and include action. The next question is mention the important action tags. The important action tags which we use in JSP are JSP forward. JSP forward is used to forward the request and response to another resource. The next tag is JSP include. JSP include tag is used to include another resource. Next is JSP use bean. This action tag is used to locate or to create another bean object. And next, JSP set property. JSP set property tag is used to set the property value to a bean object. JSP get property prints the property value of a bean object. Next, JSP fallback. JSP fallback tag is used to print message if the plugin is working or not. Next, we have JSP plugin. This JSP plugin tag is used to embed another component such as an applet. And last important action tag is JSP param. This JSP param tag is used to set the parameter value. The next question is, how can I use JSP in the MVC model? The answer for this question is, JSP is used in MVC model, that is model view controller, in the presentation tasks. It is used as a view. The controller calls the model and the business classes that get the data. This data is rendered into the JSP for rendering it to the client. Now let us deal with the next question. What are context initialization parameters? Context initialization parameters are the initializing parameters for the whole application. They are not specific to any servlet or a JSP. Context initialization parameters are specified using the following syntax in a web.xml file. So this particular syntax is used to set the parameter name, and this particular line of code is used to set the parameter value. And this particular values will be enclosed inside the context parameter tags. Now with this, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, mention the scope values for JSP.useBean tag. There are 4 different scope values available for JSP.useBean tag. They are page, request, application, and session. Now, the next question is, what are the literals used in JSP? The literals used in JSP page are as follows: null, boolean, string, integer, and float. The next question, what are the major differences between servlet context and page context. The major difference between servlet context and page context is that the servlet context is designed to provide information about the container, whereas on the other hand, the page context is designed to provide the information about the request. Followed by this, the next question is, why are the request.getRequestDispatcher method and context.getRequestDispatcher method used? The request_dispatcher method and the context.getRequestDispatcher method are used for the following purposes. Request.getRequestDispatcher method is used to create a request. We need to give the relative path for the resource. Where on the other hand, context.getRequestDispatcher is used to create context, and we need to give the absolute path of the resource here. With this, we shall move on to the next level of interview questions, which are the intermediate level of interview questions. So the first question in the intermediate level of interview questions are, list down the differences between the JSP custom tags and Java beans. So the basic differences between the JSP custom tags and the Java beans are as follows. The custom tags can manipulate JSP content, where on the other hand, Java beans cannot manipulate the JSP content. Followed by that, executing complex operations in JSP custom tags is simple, whereas executing complex operations is a bit difficult when it comes to Java beans. The next difference is the JSP custom tags are hard to set up, but the JSP beans are very simple to set up. And the last difference between the both is custom tags are available only in JSP version 1.1, whereas the Java beans are used in all JSP versions starting from 1.x versions. The next question in the intermediate level is, how are custom tags in JSP created? The custom tags in JSP are created using the following steps. First, creating the tag handler class. To create a tag handler class, we need to inherit the tag support class and then override doStartTag method. To write the data for JSP, we need to use the JSP writer class. The page context class provides getOut method, which returns the instance of the JSP writer class. The tag support class provides the instance of the page context by default. The next step is creating the TLD file. TLD stands for Tag Library Descriptor File. It contains the information related to the tag and the tag handler classes. It must be held inside the web INF directory. Followed by that, the last step is creating the JSP file. We will be specifying the path of the TLD file directly. It is recommended to use URI name instead of the full path of the TLD file. It uses taglib directive to use the tags defined in the TLD file. The next question is, mention the various implicit objects used in the expression. The various implicit objects used are as follows. First one, page scope. Page scope maps the attribute name with the values set in the page scope. The next one is request scope. Request scope maps the attribute name with the value set in the request scope. Followed by that, we have param. Param maps the request parameter to a single value. Next, session scope. Session scope maps the attribute name with the value set in the session scope. Followed by that, we have the application scope. Application scope maps the attribute name with the values set in the application scope. Param values. Param values map the request parameter to an array of values. Next is header. Header maps the request header name to the single value. The next one is cookie. Cookie maps the cookie name to the cookie value. Followed by that, we have page context. Page context provides access to object request, session, and many more. Next, we have init param. Init param maps the initialization parameter. And finally, we have the header values. Header values map the request header name to the single value. With this, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, mention the 3 important tags used in the development of JSP bean. The answer for this question is, the 3 important tags used in the JSP development are JSP useBean, JSP setProperty, and finally the JSP getProperty. The next question is, can you disable the caching on the back button of a particular browser? The answer is yes. The caching process can be disabled on the back button of a browser. To do so, we can use the following code below. This particular code can be used to disable the caching of back button in any particular browser. Now with this, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, mention the implicit objects in a JSP. The answer is, the web container creates the objects that include the information related to a particular request, application, or a page. These objects are called as implicit objects. The implicit objects in a particular JSP are as follows. First, request. Followed by that, we have the response. Then, application and exception, config, page, session, page context, and finally, the out. Now, let us move on to our next question. Can you stop multiple submits to a web page? The answer is yes. This particular issue can be solved using a post, redirect, get, or a PRG pattern. A form is filled by the user and gets submitted to the server using the post or get method. Then, the state in the database and business model are updated. Followed by that, a redirect response is used to reply to the servlet for the view page. Then, a view is loaded by the browser using the get command and no user data is sent. This is safe from multiple submits as it is a separate JSP page. Followed by this, we have our next question. How can you include static files in a JSP? The answer is, static pages can be included in a JSP using the include directive. This way, the inclusion is performed in the translation phase once. Note that the relative URL must be supplied for the file attribute. Although static resources may be included, it is not preferred as each request requires inclusion. Followed by this, we have our next question. How can we stop errors on display in a JSP page? The answer is, we can stop errors in display in a JSP page by setting up error page attribute of a page directory to the name of the error page in the JSP page. And then the error JSP page is set to error page is equals to true. This can stop errors to be displayed on a JSP page. Now, with this, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, can a constructor be used in place of an init method to initialize a servlet? The answer is yes, we can use a constructor in place of init method, but it is not preferred because init method was specially developed because earlier Java versions could not invoke constructors with arguments dynamically. So they could not assign a servlet config. However, servlet containers can still call an only no-arg constructor. So there is no access to servlet context or servlet config. The next question is, what are the different lifecycle methods? The answer is, the different lifecycle methods are as follows. They are JSP init method, JSP service method, and finally JSP destroy method. Firstly, the JSP init. Container calls JSP init method to initialize servlet instance. It is called once for the servlet instance and preceded every other method. The next is JSP service. Container calls the JSP service method for each request and passes it on to the objects. And finally, container calls the JSP destroy method just before the destruction of the instance. Now with this, let us move on to our next question. What are the attributes on a page directives? The different attributes of a page directive are as follows. Session import is EL ignored, and finally content type. Session. It is designed to show if any session data is available to a page or not. The next is import. It is dedicated to show packages that are imported. And next is EL ignored. This shows whether EL expressions are ignored when a JSP transforms into a servlet or not. And finally, the content type. It allows the user to specify the content type of a particular page. Now, let us move on to our next question. Explain client-side and server-side validation. The answer for this question is the client-side validation is done using JavaScript. The validation takes place within the browser. The JavaScript is used to submit the data in the form when the validation is successful. Validation errors do not require any extra network trip because the form cannot be submitted if there are any errors. Similar kind of data validation is carried out in the server side after the submission of form. In case if the validation fails, then the extra network trip is required to resend the form to the client to refill the form with the correct data. Let us move on to our next question. The next question is explain translation phase. The answer for this question is during the translation phase, the JSP engine translates and compiles a JSP file into a servlet. This servlet moves to the execution phase where all the requests and responses are handled. They are compiled for the first time and they are not accessed unless they are manually compiled. The manual or explicit compilation is used for long and convoluted programs. Now, let us move on to the next question. What is object cloning? The answer for this question is the object cloning is a process of creating an exact copy of the existing object. The clone method of object class is used to create a clone of an existing object. The class whose object the user tries to clone is expected to implement the java.lang.clonable interface. If it does not implement the clonable interface, then the clone method generates a clone not supported exception. Now, followed by this, let us move on to our next question. Write a simple example for clone method. So the answer for this question is as follows. Now the following code is an example for clonable object. Here, I'm trying to create a new object by the name student, and my object will be including two different values. First one, the name of the student, and then the roll number of the student. The name of the student is Arjun, and the roll number is 101102. And now I'll be trying to implement the clonable interface and clone the object student. As you can see, after executing the program, you'll be generating the following output. You can see that the object student is been cloned and the same clone object is been printed twice. Now with this, let us move on to our next question. The next question is define JSP declaration. The JSP declaration tag is used to declare fields and methods. The code is written inside the JSP declaration and is included within the following tag. It is placed outside the service method of the auto-generated servlet. So the syntax for declaring a JSP declaration tag is as follows. And this particular code segment is a simple example for declaration tag in JSP. Now followed by this, we shall move on to our next question. The next question is, what are the differences between JSP scriptlet tag and declaration tag? The first difference between JSP scriptlet tag and declaration tag is JSP scriptlet tag can only declare variables, whereas declaration tag can declare both methods as well as variables. The next difference is scriptlet tag is placed within JSP service method, whereas the declaration tag is placed outside the JSP service method. Now the next question is, how are JSPs better than ASP? The answer for this question is, there are numerous advantages of JSP over ASP, and they are as follows. Firstly, the dynamic part of the code is written in Java, not in Visual Basic or Microsoft specific language. Hence, it is powerful and easier to use. The next advantage is JSPs are portable to other operating systems and non-Microsoft web servers. With this, let us move on to our next question. Mention the advantages of JSP over pure servlets. Some of the major advantages of JSP over pure servlets are discussed as below. It is more convenient to write and modify normal HTML than to have plenty of print line statements that generate the HTML. Next advantage is we can embed the Java code in HTML pages. Followed by that, it is completely platform independent. Then, the creation of database-driven web applications is very simple using JSPs. And finally, JSP has server-side programming capabilities. Now, with this, let us move on to the next level of interview questions, which are the advanced level of interview questions. The first question in the advanced level of interview questions is, what is autoflash attribute? The answer is, the autoflash attribute is used to specify if a buffered output should be flashed automatically when a buffer is filled, or an exception should be raised to indicate the buffer overflow. A value of true by default indicates automatic buffer flushing, and a value of false throws an exception. Followed by this, let us move on to our next question. What do you mean by is scripting enabled attribute? Is scripting enabled attribute determines if scripting elements are allowed for use or not. The default value is true and it enables scriptlets, expressions, and declarations. If the attribute's value is set to false, then a translation time error will be raised if the JSP uses any scriptlets, expressions, or declarations. The next question is, what are the steps involved in reading data from form using JSP? The answer is, the data passing in a JSP is always automatic. It is done through the following steps depending on the situation. The first one is getParameter method. Request.getParameter method is called to get the value from the form parameter. Next, we have getParameterValues method. This particular method calls if the parameter appears more than once and returns multiple values. Next, we have getParameterNames. This method is called if the user wants a complete list of all the parameters in the current request. And finally, getInputStream method. This method is used to read the binary data stream coming from the client. Now, let us move on to our next question. How are cookies set in JSP? Setting cookies in JSP involves the following steps. They are creating cookie object. Cookie constructor is called with a cookie name and a cookie value. Both are strings. The next step is setting the maximum age. setMaxAge is used to specify the length of the cookie, and the length of the cookie is actually the time in seconds. The length of the cookie should be set with a valid value. And finally, we have sending the cookie into the HTTP response headers. Response.addCookie is used to add cookies in the HTTP response header. Now with this, let us move on to our next question. How do you delete the session data? The answer for this question is, deleting the session data involves the following steps. Remove a particular attribute. Public void remove attribute method is called to delete the value associated with a particular key. Followed by that, the next step is to delete the whole session. Public void invalidate method is called to discard an entire session. The next step is setting the session timeout. Public void setMax inactive interval method is called to set the timeout for a session individually. The next step is log the user out. The logout is called to log the client out of the web server and invalidate all sessions belonging to all the users. And finally, web.xml configuration. In Tomcat, using the above mentioned methods, one can configure session timeout in web.xml file. Now, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, how to delete a cookie in JSP? The answer for this question is, we can use the following code snippet to delete a cookie in a JSP page. Now, let us move on to our next question. Explain the difference between forward and send redirect. The answer for this question is, when a forward request is called, the request is sent to the direct resource on the server without the client being informed that a different resource is going to process the request. This process occurs completely within the web container. And whereas on the other hand, when a send redirect method is invoked, it causes the web container to return to the browser, indicating that the new URL should be requested. Since the browser issues a completely new request, and any objects that are stored as request attributes before the redirect occurs will be lost. This extra round trip as a redirect is slower than forward. Now, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, mention the JSTL core tags. The answer is as follows. The important JSTL core tags are cout tag, cset tag, cremove tag, cif tag, cchoose tag, cwhen tag, cotherwise tag, ccatch tag, and credirect tag. Now, let us move on to our next question. Why are JSP pages preferred for creating web-based client program? The answer is, JSP is preferred for creating web-based client program because no plugins or security policy files are needed on the client systems, whereas Applet does. Also, JSP pages enable more cleaner and more modular application design because they provide a separate way for application programming and web page design. This means personnel involved in web page design do not need to understand Java programming syntax to do their jobs. Followed by this, our next question is, how can you make a finally clause not to fail to execute? The answer for this question is, it is possible to make the finally clause to not to fail by using system.exit in the try block. Followed by this, the next question is, why does JComponent have add method and remove method, but the component does not? The answer for this question is, it is because the JComponent is a subclass of the container, and it can contain the components as well as the JComponents. You can make your JSPs thread safe by having them implement the single thread model interface. This is done by adding the directive page is thread safe is equals to false within your JSP page. Followed by this, we have our next question. Explain some JSP lifecycle methods that can be overridden. The answer for this question is, you can override the JSP init method and JSP destroy methods within a JSP page. It is good programming practice to free any allocated resources within JSP destroy method. The JSP init and JSP destroy methods are each executed just once during the lifecycle of a JSP page and are typically declared as JSP declarations. Now, let us move on to our next question. How can I declare methods within my JSP page? The answer is, methods can be declared for use within JSP page. The methods invoked within any other methods you declare or within JSP scriptlets and expressions. Do note that you have direct access to any of the JSP implicit objects like request, response, session, and so forth from within JSP methods. However, you should be able to pass any of the implicit JSP variables as parameters to the methods you declared. Followed by this, we have our next question. What is a hidden commit? The answer is, the commit that documents the JSP page but is not sent to the client is known as the hidden commit. The JSP engine ignores a hidden commit and does not process any code within the hidden commit tags. A hidden commit is not sent to the client, either in the displayed JSP page or the HTML page source. The hidden commit is useful when you want to hide or comment out a part of your JSP page. Now, let us move on to our next question. How does a servlet communicate with a JSP page? The answer for this question is, the following code snippet shows how a servlet instantiates a bean and initializes it with the form data posted by the browser. The bean is then placed into the request and the call then forwarded to the JSP page. bean1.jsp by means of a request dispatcher for the downstream processing. Now, with this, let us move on to our next question. Can you disable JSP scripting page? The answer is yes. Scripting is disabled by setting the scripting invalid element of the deployment descriptor to true. It is a sub-element of JSP property group and its valid values are true and false. Now, let us move on to our next question. The next question is, how to deactivate EL on a JSP? The answer is, there are two ways to ignore the execution of an EL, that is expression language, on a JSP. First one, use the directive page EL ignore is equals to true, and the next method is to configure a web.xml. This method is best suited to disable the EL on multiple pages. The following syntax can be used to disable the EL on multiple JSP pages. Now, followed by this, we shall move on to our next question. When does a container initialize multiple JSP objects? The answer for this question is, in case where there are multiple servlets and servlet mapping elements in the deployment descriptor for one single servlet or JSP page, then the server initializes an object for each element and each of these objects has its own servlet config object and initialization parameters. The following code snippet uses one JSP page in web.xml as shown below. Now, with this, let us move on to our last question in this particular session. The question is, give a sample JSP configuration in deployment descriptor. The answer is, the JSP config element is used to configure various parameters of JSP pages. Management of scriptlet elements on the JSP page, controlling the execution of expressions in a language, URL pattern definition for encoding, determining the size of the buffer that is used for objects on the page, identification of resource groups corresponding to a URL pattern that can be processed as XML document. The following code snippet is an example for JSP configuration in the deployment descriptor. Now, with this, we have come to the end of this session. If you have any queries related to this session, or if you need the codes to the questions asked in this particular session, then you can write down in the comment section below and we will respond to you as quick as possible. Till then, thank you and happy learning.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!